it's been a week of bold declarations from most of the nation acknowledging that policing needs big change, to Mayor Marty Walsh declaring that racism is a public health crisis in Boston. The fallout from the death of George Floyd continues, and no one is immune from its reverberations, including the news business. New York Times opinion editor James Bennett was forced to resign after running an op-ed calling for the U.S. military to crack down on protesters. It's just one example of escalating tensions between newsroom management and staff who have very different ideas about how the press should respond to the moment we're in. Adam has more.
If Senator Tom Cotton's call for military suppression was supposed to spark discussion, it succeeded, but not the way James Bennett probably wanted.
This is very unusual to see one of the top editors of the New York Times suddenly resign, clearly under pressure.
Not just from readers, but also Times staff, who went public with their frustration.
Many of them are tweeting, quote, "Running this puts black New York Times staffers in danger."
The premise there is that at this fraught moment in American history, old-fashioned journalistic detachment doesn't cut it. That same argument cost Philadelphia Inquirer editor Stan Wisniewski his job after that paper published an architecture commentary headlined, "Buildings Matter, Too."
30 employees at the paper declined to work Thursday, many publicly calling in, quote, sick and tired.
Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, the Post-Gazette is defending its decision to keep 2 black staffers from covering protests in that city, claiming they showed signs of bias on social media. The union doesn't buy it.
The Post-Gazette is on the wrong side of history.
Also getting intense scrutiny, the exit of reporter Wesley Lowery from the Washington Post earlier this year, after his use of social media was questioned by editor Marty Barron. A new story by Times media writer Ben Smith suggests Lowery was unfairly targeted and quotes him saying the media's core value needs to be the truth, not the perception of objectivity. Clearly, he's not the only one who feels that way.
You know, and I'm not one to lament the past. I'm not looking at the good old days of Walter Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley. I like what we have. I like the variety. I like the options. We didn't used to have those many decades ago. But I'm not quite ready to give up on this notion of old-fashioned journalistic detachment. I mean, you know, call it something else. But, you know, this idea that we should all just be giving our opinion. This is an opinion show. But this idea that everybody should just, you know, give up the ghost and admit what you are and start reporting. And maybe that's where we are. Maybe that's. But I frankly, I admit I'm on the, you know, the outer edges of the detachment side of this.
Well, I should confess my own bias at the outset. I mean, before working at WGBH, worked at the Boston Phoenix, which did advocacy journalism. It was an all-weekly. It did not ascribe to traditional norms of neutrality and balance. So I have grown up with a different perspective. I feel like, and I'm paraphrasing Lowery here, but I've said similar things before. I feel like when it comes to objectivity, that should be a summons to the most truthful, accurate description that we can offer, rather than some sort of report which provides equal measures of one side and the other side. I would add that I think the way has been paved, among other things, for the moment that we're in right now, by the presidency of Donald Trump. It was very easy to stick with traditional ideas about objectivity when we had presidents who, whatever their party, behaved in a sort of a narrow range of possibilities. You know, whether they were conservative or liberal, they weren't going to do certain things. Now that we have a guy in the White House who seems like, on many occasions, a wannabe autocrat, simply describing what he is doing objectively may sound biased, but it isn't. It's honest and truthful. So that's where I come down on this stuff.
You know, I think that what's going on right now is obviously very important across all sectors, but more importantly, as part of our discussion, we're getting a chance to turn the lens on our industry. And there are a lot of things that have been going on for years in newsrooms where minorities have been either held back because of certain leadership or just the tone of how issues of race were handled inside newsrooms. It was just not addressed, or if it wasn't in a complete way. And so I think it's good that we are hearing about a lot of these various things coming to the surface now in newsrooms, and some people are having to step down or admit that they have been wrong. But like you, Emily, I'm still stuck to some of the traditions of the old school journalism. And when it comes to whether or not reporters should be activists, whether you should be allowed to go out there and protest, I just think that you have to step away from that as a reporter. There are a lot of other fields that you can go into if you want to have the freedom to go out and protest and do whatever, say whatever you want. But as a journalist, because you have signed up to do this job, you're a journalist all the time. And I think it's very difficult then moving forward for people to separate you, the person out there protesting, from the journalist.
I want to go back to the Times for a second in that particular op-ed because, and I come from a history of working at an op-ed page at the Globe. So, I watched that closely and how that went down. And the one thing I found a little disingenuous about how it went down was this idea that the Times said, they published it. There was a furor inside and outside the newsroom. Then the Times said, oh, we made a mistake. This slipped through the cracks. This didn't go through our normal vetting process. That doesn't ring true to me. And everything I've read about, interviews with Tom Cotton's staff, this was a deliberate, and thought out effort to put something provocative out there. It was vetted. It was edited. It was, the angle was discussed. It came out. Then they decided they had made, and it was a judgment call on the part of the Times. Then they decided they'd made a misjudgment. And okay. But be truthful about what you're doing. I mean, the fact is, with all editorial pages and editorial forums, there is an uncrossable line.
Did you think he should have resigned? Did you think he should have resigned, Joanna?
I think it was a long time coming. I think it was more than just this incident. Yeah. He was a controversial figure for many, many years, and I think this was probably the straw that broke the camel's back for him. But, you make a decision, you make an editorial judgment about what's beyond the pale, and that line moves. And I think it's moving again. And that's what I think they're grappling with.
I think there's a lot of stuff in this conversation that all of you have raised, and not all of it is the same. So I want to just raise up something. Wesley Lowery and the young woman reporter from Pittsburgh who was accused of being biased, I don't take either of their statements to be such. Both of them are very firm about you've got to be absolute about what the facts are. I don't think she was arguing to be a protester. She was arguing to cover the protests. And what I deeply resent is that because she was black, it was assumed that she therefore is biased about it. What she did, just so everybody understands, was send out a tweet which said, oh, look at this trash, this looting, this horribleness that went on. Oh, wow, this is after a Kenny Chesney concert, making the point that usually in a conversation about looting, it's all about black folks. And yet there we were with the evidence that it happened in a different way with white people and Kenny Chesney. Same thing with Wesley Lowery. He is not saying, let me just be free with all of my opinions. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, be accurate. You must be fair. I must interrogate my own biases before I report because I know how I feel about stuff. And what I put in the report has to represent all sides. I'm not saying there are two. But all sides. And so what has been elevated in this discussion is really about, back to a little bit of what Dan said, about how we cover race and how the perspectives of black journalists have often been dismissed or thought to be biased. And neither is true.
That's true.